Tonight at 10, Donald Trump says America must greatly expand and strengthen its nuclear weapons capability. In yet another message on social media, the president-elect says expansion is needed until the world comes to its senses regarding nuclear weapons. The Trump team says he was warning about the dangers of terrorist organizations and unstable regimes getting access to nuclear weapons. And earlier today, President Putin was talking about Russia's need to expand its nuclear capability. Also tonight, new images of the main suspect in the Berlin attack. His fingerprints have been found inside the lorry driven into that Christmas market. The owner and mechanic of this truck with faulty brakes are both jailed for manslaughter after 4 people were killed in a crash in Bath last year.
We are now seeing the rise of many populist groups across the world.
The Prince of Wales warns of the growing danger of religious persecution, comparing it to the dark days of the 1930s.
I am agile with something to say.
And we meet the 7-year-old Syrian girl who longs to return to her former life in the city of Aleppo.
In the south, hope for Greg. The frontman of Southampton band Delays has cancer and his family are fundraising for his treatment. And as many prepare for the great Christmas getaway, we have the latest on tomorrow's travel.
Good evening. Donald Trump, who will be sworn in as US President in a month's time, has called for America's nuclear weapons capability to be greatly strengthened and expanded. He made the call in another of his messages on social media. Mr. Trump warned that expansion would be needed until the world came to its senses regarding nuclear weapons. His advisor said later he'd been warning about the dangers of terrorist organizations and unstable regimes getting hold of these weapons. Our defense correspondent Jonathan Beale has more details.
3, 2.
America and Russia still hold more than 90% of the world's nuclear stockpiles, both able to deliver destruction on a massive scale by ground, sea or air. For a quarter of a century, they have been reducing their nuclear arsenal. But the question now is the arms race about to resume. Tonight, President-elect Donald Trump tweeted, "The United States must greatly strengthen and expand its nuclear capability until such time as the world comes to its senses regarding nukes." It caught many by surprise, including the Obama administration.
I can't speak for what the President-elect's nuclear views or his policy going forward. That's for him and his team to speak to. What I can speak to is the approach that this administration has taken to trying to get us on a path to a world without nuclear weapons.
President Putin, too, has been ramping up the nuclear rhetoric. Today, addressing his military commanders, he talked of the need to strengthen Russia's strategic nuclear forces.
We can say with certainty that we are stronger now than any potential aggressor, anyone.
Both the United States and Russia have made large cuts to their nuclear arsenals since the height of the Cold War, but they still have many weapons. The US has stockpiles of 7,000 warheads, of which 1,900 are deployed or ready to use. Russia has just over 7,000 warheads, with just under 1,800 deployable, while the UK has 215 warheads, of which 120 are available to use and could be fired from its Vanguard submarines. Both America and Russia are already modernizing their nuclear weapons systems at significant cost. What's not clear is whether Donald Trump now wants to go much further. Tensions have been rising with Russia. These US troops on exercise in the Baltics a response to its intervention in Ukraine. Russia's military campaign in Syria has deepened the rift. But Donald Trump has signaled he wants to improve relations with Moscow. So his comments might be more directed at North Korea, whose unpredictable leader boasts of now being a nuclear power, or even Iran. Donald Trump threatened to rip up a deal over its nuclear program, still suspicious of Iran's intentions.
What Donald Trump did with that tweet was restart the nuclear arms race. It's not just strengthen our nuclear arsenal, it's expand our nuclear arsenal. When we have arms control agreements that limit, that reduce, that cap the weapons we deploy, he pays no heed to that, seems to want to bust through the caps.
With nuclear weapons, words matter. Once again, a Donald Trump tweet has surprised and raised plenty of questions. Jonathan Beale, BBC News.
Let's go live to the White House, and our correspondent there is Laura Bicker. Laura, to what extent are people in Washington taking this message at face value that they expect, for example, President Trump to move quickly to expand the nuclear arsenal that America has?
Well, it's difficult to say because in 140 characters or less, it's difficult to decipher Donald Trump's policy on nuclear weapons. So it was up to his team to try to do it for us. In a statement, they said that President-elect was referring to the threat of nuclear proliferation and the critical need to prevent it, particularly to and among terror organisations and unstable and rogue regimes. Well, who could he be aiming at? Was that tweet simply posturing and aiming at Vladimir Putin? Or was he referring to perhaps the so-called Islamic State getting their hands on nuclear weapons, which, by the way, in an interview, he said he would not rule out using weapons of mass destruction against the Islamic State. And when it came to other organisations, he said he wanted to be unpredictable. But what could Donald Trump do? There's a $1 trillion package underway to revamp aging nuclear programs here in the United States. If he wanted to add to that, well, that would be very costly. In truth, Hugh, there's only one man who really knows what he meant, and that is Donald Trump himself. And in 29 days, he will have his hands on the nuclear codes.
Laura, many thanks again. Laura Bicker there for us at the White House tonight. Well, German police say there's clear evidence linking their main suspect, a Tunisian man, Anis Amri, to the attack on a Christmas market in Berlin. His fingerprints have been found in the lorry that was driven into shoppers on Monday, killing 12 people. Speaking at the family home in Tunisia, Amri's brother has called on him to give himself up. And Chancellor Merkel said today that she was proud of the calm way in which Germans had responded to the attack, as our Europe correspondent Damien Grammaticus tells us.
It's new footage that's just emerged, the scene immediately after Monday's attack, filmed from a dashboard-mounted camera. A few seconds earlier, this is what happened. We've slowed the footage. From the left comes the lorry at speed, heading straight for the Christmas market. And this is Anis Amri, the man police say was driving it. Filming himself, humming nonchalantly in Berlin, video posted to his Facebook page in September. Now the 24-year-old Tunisian is Europe's most wanted man. Police first found his ID documents in the cab of the lorry. Now tests have shown his fingerprints on the door and the bodywork. The conclusion, he was at the wheel. Angela Merkel this afternoon thanked Germans for their measured reaction to the attack.
Our thoughts are constantly with the victims' relatives and with the injured. We owe it to them to give this our very best. I can say that we have done a lot in recent years to meet the challenge of terrorism.
But police raids in Germany earlier today targeted Anis Amri's known contacts, turning up nothing. His family, back in Tunisia, last saw him 5 years ago. They say he wasn't religious, drank alcohol, and dreamed of owning a car, starting a business.
If my brother is listening to me, I want to tell him to surrender, for the sake of our family. We'll be relieved. If he did what he's suspected of having done, he'll be sanctioned, and it will be a dishonour for us. But I'm sure that my brother is innocent.
Anis Amri left his family travelling illegally to Italy in 2011. He spent 4 years in jail for violence and theft, but without a passport he couldn't be deported to Tunisia. So last year he moved to Kleve in Germany. Denied asylum, once again he wasn't deported. Security services feared he was trying to get automatic weapons for an attack, but with no new evidence, surveillance of him was halted in September.
So there are serious questions. Should the authorities have taken the threat posed by Anis Amri more seriously? But for most Germans, as the markets reopen here with new security barriers, criticisms of the police are less important than how they respond.
So getting Breitscheidplatz back up and running today was symbolic for Berlin.
We have to respond to the terrorism. That we don't care. We're gonna open. We are not scared because it's exactly what they want.
The crowds were thinner than usual, but wanted to show they wouldn't be cowed. I've come to show we must not hide, says Rosemary. I'm very sad. I was here on Monday. Luckily I left before it happened. I feel anger and sadness. More anger, says Annika. I didn't know any of the victims, but it makes me really angry. Not so much fear as defiance then. Berliners determined to show they won't give up the things they value and enjoy.
Let's go live to Berlin tonight, and Damien is there. Damien, tell us a little more about the progress in this investigation that's been reported today.
Well, Hugh, this is quite an important step forward, I think. The fingerprint evidence that now means police think that Anis Amri was driving that truck. The question is, where did he go after the attack here? Now, late this evening, some newspapers here have published grainy photos taken in the hours after the attack outside a mosque in Berlin, showing a man loitering in the doorway, and they say that may be Anis Amri. We can't be sure. We know police raided that mosque today and found nothing. So there are serious questions to answer about why they haven't been able to track him down. Are there people helping him? And why, before the attacks, were the security services warnings not heeded? And why was he not deported? But it's worth remembering that for now, I think Germans are putting those questions, that criticism, to one side. This is the first mass casualty-like attack like this, terror attack in Germany. They are shocked but willing to, I think, react with some patience. The question, though, remains, where is Anis Amri? Where has he gone? And tonight he remains armed, dangerous, and still on the run.
Damien, thanks very much again for the latest there in Berlin. Damien Grammaticus. The owner of a haulage company and his mechanic have both been convicted of manslaughter after a truck with faulty brakes crashed in Bath last year, killing 3 men and a 4-year-old girl. Matthew Gordon and Peter Wood will be sentenced next month. The vehicle's driver, Philip Potter, was cleared of all charges. Our correspondent John Kay has been following the trial at Bristol Crown Court.
Police said it was carnage. A 32-ton truck with defective brakes had careered down a steep hill towards the centre of Bath. 4-year-old Mitzi Steady didn't stand a chance. Businessmen Robert Parker and Philip Allen were also hit, killed with their driver Stephen Vaughan, who was just married.
It's just been a horrendous time.
Sian Vaughan told me that being widowed so soon after her wedding day had left her heartbroken.
We were only married for 6 months. And especially having to spend your first wedding anniversary alone was just so far removed from the one that we had planned. It's just been absolutely horrendous.
Today, the boss of Grittenham Haulage, Matthew Gordon, and mechanic Peter Wood were both found guilty of manslaughter. The trial heard the company was a shambles, failing to carry out proper safety checks. The jury was told that as the tipper truck came down the hill that afternoon, its brakes were badly worn, rusty, and in a poor state of repair. Philip Potter, who was at the wheel of the truck, was found not guilty of causing death by dangerous or careless driving.
They're constantly in my thoughts.
He left court sending his thoughts to the bereaved families. He told the jury he hadn't realised the truck was in such a poor state until the brakes failed. And he said his boss had told him to ignore a warning light on the dashboard.
This one is for Mitzi because when it's blooming it comes out pink.
Before the trial, he told BBC News he'd planted trees on the family farm in memory of the victims.
It's like you press replay in your head every night. You go to close your eyes and you just see it. And you think, there was nothing else I could have done that day to have prevented it. Just thinking of the 4 people all the time, just thinking how horrible it must be for the families and just how hard it would be to lose someone that you love so much.
Philip Potter told the trial that as he sat here that afternoon trying to take in what had just happened, his boss, Matthew Gordon, came over to him, grabbed him and said, "Don't tell the police about the brake warning light."
This was all very much preventable. It denied us of a family.
Sian Vaughan says she's been horrified to hear in court about the state of the truck, especially as her chauffeur husband took safety so seriously.
A word he would have used to describe them would have been cowboys, because there's no way that Steve would have ever put anybody's life in danger, let alone his own.
The families hope Matthew Gordon's conviction will send a clear message to the owners of all haulage companies. He and Peter Wood were remanded in custody to be sentenced in the new year. John Kay, BBC News.
The Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh have arrived at Sandringham for Christmas, a day later than planned because they're both suffering from heavy colds. A helicopter arrived at Buckingham Palace to take them to Norfolk around lunchtime today. The palace confirmed their departure but wouldn't make any further comment on their health. Well, the Prince of Wales has warned of the dangers of religious persecution and intolerance, and he's likened the current threat to religions and religious groups around the world to the situation in the 1930s. Prince Charles said religious freedom was particularly at risk in the Middle East, as our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell tells us.
Religious persecution is as old as faith itself. A Coptic church blown up in Cairo. Christians in Iraq and Syria kidnapped or driven from their countries, and attacks on Yazidis and Jews and others. Tolerance and freedom of worship are important to the Prince of Wales. He recently attended the consecration of a new Syriac Orthodox church in West London. He's troubled by the growing evidence of intolerance.
Normally, at Christmas, we think of the birth...
In a broadcast for BBC Radio's Thought for the Day, Charles likened the persecution of religious minorities and refugees to what happened to the Jews in Nazi Germany.
We are now seeing the rise of many populist groups across the world that are increasingly aggressive towards those who adhere to a minority faith. All of this has deeply disturbing echoes of the dark days of the 1930s. I was born in 1948, just after the end of World War II, in which my parents' generation had fought and died in a battle against intolerance, monstrous extremism, and an inhuman attempt to exterminate the Jewish population of Europe. That nearly 70 years later, we should still be seeing such evil persecution is, to me, beyond all belief.
He ended his broadcast with a plea for tolerance.
Whichever religious path we follow, the destination is the same: to value and respect the other person, accepting their right to live out their peaceful response to the love of God.
The Prince's intervention has been applauded.
I think it was bold, strong, timely, and necessary. Here is a man who will one day be defender of the faith in Britain, who has always said he wants to be defender of faith itself, and he is protesting the rise of religiously motivated violence throughout the world. It was strong and courageous and deeply humanitarian.
In due course, when he's King and Supreme Governor of the Church of England, Charles knows that his freedom to speak out will be constrained. But for now, and on subjects such as this, he feels he has a duty to try to make his voice heard. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News, at Clarence House.
The Syrian army says it's now in control of all of Aleppo, the biggest military victory for President Assad in almost 6 years of war. The last convoy of civilians and rebel fighters was escorted out this evening. One of those brought out in the past few days was 7-year-old Bana Al-Abed, whose messages on social media covered everything from the death of friends to her family's attempts to lead a normal life. Our correspondent Ola Gerin has been to meet Bana and her mother.
Hello, I am Bana. I am 7 years old. I am from Aleppo.
From the rubble of Aleppo to the red carpet in Ankara, Bana Al-Abed and her family are now being hosted by the Turkish government, which opposes the Syrian regime. When we met, this child of war told me how her own home was flattened by a bomb.
We were playing happily and planning to go out, and suddenly it landed. So we got scared and ran to the basement.
When our house was bombed, we got out of the rubble safely, but we were about to die because the house was collapsing.
Her updates from inside Aleppo echoed around the world, with help from her mother, who manages her Twitter account. But some have questioned whose views were being shared. When your mum was she tweeting your words or tweeting her words?
Me and Mom.
Together?
Yes.
Her mother, Fatima, insists the Twitter account was Bana's idea, but admits it is a way to combat the regime.
I think Bana was a big fighter there, and I think our Twitter was a weapon.
Your Twitter was a weapon?
Yes.
But the tweets attracted threats and made it harder for the family to join the mass evacuation of eastern Aleppo. Fatima got Bana onto one of the buses, disguised as a boy. Today, the last opposition fighters retreated from their former stronghold, and by evening, the Syrian army was in control of the entire city for the first time in more than 4.5 years. Just days after escaping all this, Bana dreams of returning.
I was happy to leave, but sad at the same time. I wish I could go back to Aleppo, go back home. I want to live in my house because I love it, even if it had been bombed. I love my house.
We shall overcome someday.
Before saying goodbye, Bana sang us a song about childhood and stolen freedoms.
I am a child with something to say.
One voice raised for countless others who often go unheard. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Ankara.
Hopes and dreams of 7-year-old Bana Alabed there, and her mother, of course, talking to my colleague Orla Guerin. The funeral of the Russian ambassador to Turkey, who was shot dead 3 days ago in Ankara, has been held in Moscow. Andrei Karlov was murdered by an off-duty policeman while giving a speech in the Turkish capital. President Putin was among the mourners at a special ceremony before the burial took place, with full military honours. Here, the planned strikes by British Airways cabin crew on Christmas Day and Boxing Day have been suspended. Members of the Unite Union were due to walk out as part of their dispute over pay, but talks have led to a revised offer which will now be put to a ballot. Now, more than 60 prisoners have taken control of a wing at HMP Swaleside on the Isle of Sheppey in Kent. The Prison Officers Association says fires have been lit there, but says the situation is isolated to one of the landings. It comes less than a week after a riot at HMP Birmingham, which took some 12 hours to bring under control. Well, for the latest, we're going to talk to our correspondent, Peter Whittlesey, who's on the Isle of Sheppey. And Peter, just bring us right up to date on the situation there.
Well, it's unclear exactly what the latest situation is, but according to the prison service, it's now isolated to a landing on one wing. But the inmates were refusing to go back into their cells. Now, images of this riot are now emerging, and one person purporting to be an inmate phoned the BBC, saying that the prison is now in lockdown. He said the riot was triggered after prison staff raided cells and confiscated properties. Now, earlier I was able to go down to the prison, which is about 3/4 of a mile down this road. I could, from outside the prison, I could clearly hear inmates shouting and screaming from inside the prison. And outside the prison also there were fire crews and ambulance crews on standby, and also extra staff were being drafted in. And in the last half hour or so, we've seen riot vans going towards the prison.
Peter, thank you very much for the update there from the Isle of Sheppey. Peter Whittlesey there. Now, China has warned that relations with the United States could suffer complications once Donald Trump is installed as US president. During the recent election campaign, Mr. Trump made a series of controversial remarks about the impact of Chinese imports on American industry and American jobs. He's now chosen an economist who's been highly critical of China to lead a new trade council. Our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed, explores the prospects for America's relations with China.
I graduated with my bachelor's and I haven't been able to find anything.
Jobs disappear, and the way the economy's going right now, it's tough to find a job.
It was a major theme of the presidential campaign, an America that had lost its way, globalization and the rise of China being blamed for economic stagnation and millions of jobs lost. Today, President-elect Trump showed his hand, appointing the man who made this film, Death by China, as his new trade advisor. He's the economist Peter Navarro, and he's clear where he feels the fault lies.
Every job that American corporations offshore to China or some other country becomes less of a reason to stand up here and fight for fair trade practices.
President-elect Trump is following through on his campaign pledges.
We can't continue to allow China to rape our country, and that's what they're doing.
America and China are the world's two largest economies. If a trade war broke out, it could affect global growth. The trade between them is huge. It's valued at $660 billion. US exports to China are valued at $162 billion. The country is America's third largest export market, but imports from China into America are far higher, standing at $498 billion. And this, according to President-elect Trump, is the problem. A trade deficit with China totaling $336 billion. Mr. Trump says closing that gap would create a lot of jobs in America. An America that has certainly lost plenty of traditional manufacturing jobs, like here in Pennsylvania, once the heart of the US steel industry. But although people may blame outside forces, economists argue that the job market has changed and that cheap goods from China have been good for hard-pressed US consumers.
With China, it may be just, we challenge them on one of their policies and then they retaliate in some way. They may announce the retaliation, they may not. But it looks like quite a bit of friction with China in the months ahead.
China's response? As ever cautious, but caution with an edge. China does not appreciate being called an economic bully.
China and the United States as two large countries have broad common interests. Cooperation is the only correct choice.
Mr. Navarro's film is certainly provocative, and in power, of course, the tone can change. But with President-elect Trump's pledges ringing in voters' ears, and this most hawkish of China opponents now inside the White House, fears of a trade war between two global economic giants can only increase. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
A return to work after a 3-year absence would be a daunting challenge for most people, but Alex Lewis from Hampshire has had to overcome difficulties that very few have experienced. 3 years ago, he suffered an illness which led to the loss of his arms and legs. But as Duncan Kennedy reports now, the story of Alex's determination to recover and to rebuild his life is one of courage and exceptional spirit.
Precious moments with the family that kept and keep Alex Lewis going. A man whose body was devoured by flesh-consuming bacteria.
There's nothing we could have done, nothing at all, and I think in some respects that's better. I've got no blame. No one tried to blow me up in war or in any sort of conflict. It was just a bit of bad luck.
Alex's bad luck, as he puts it, started in 2013 when he went from this to this, after a cold became a strep A infection that led to sepsis blood poisoning.
In there that was doing it.
For his partner Lucy, seeing his mouth and nose disintegrate and his arms and legs amputated was devastating.
I couldn't go into the room and see him after it. I found it really difficult to go in and see. I could deal with the legs, I couldn't just deal with the arms very well.
Alex began 3 gruelling years of recovery, frustration and setback.
Round you come.
It all looked so bleak, but during his 20 operations, Alex always kept one goal in mind: to go back to work. And this week, he did.
What sort of feeling does that bring
being back at work.
It shows that you can get out, you can go back to work. You're not resigned to being stuck at home because you're missing your arms and legs. So this is the Hound Room, which is our private dining room.
Alex has become an interior designer. He tested his ideas in this restaurant, but now he's won a contract to do several more, all with the imagination he never knew he had.
Psychologically, it's a huge lift. If we can get through the previous 3 years like we've done, going back to work and creating a new business is the sort of topping of the cake, really, the icing on the cake. Come on, back on the sofa.
Alex will base himself at home and make site visits with the help of his clients. It's been a very long journey, but just listen to how he sums it all up.
Ugh. They've been the best 3 years of my life, I think, because I wasn't making the most of the life that I had prior to falling ill, and I think falling ill made me realise what I had.
People watching this may use words like hope, courage, inspiration. What's your message to come out of all this?
It means that I can move on and hopefully live an extraordinary life in a different body.
Alex Lewis, partner, father, worker. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News in Stockbridge. Yes, the inspirational story there of Alex Lewis, as told to my colleague Duncan Kennedy. More news on the BBC News channel throughout the night. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.